In a galaxy far from Earth, a beautiful and advanced alien world known as Valoria was in grave danger. For centuries, Valoria had been a beacon of peace and progress, but now it faced a terrible threat. A ruthless enemy known as the Krill had launched a full-scale invasion. The Krill were fierce, merciless, and their numbers seemed endless. Valoria's leaders were desperate. They had fought hard but were losing ground. Their once beautiful cities were in ruins, and their people were living in fear. The Krill's advanced weapons and overwhelming forces were too much for the Valorians to handle on their own. Their most brilliant scientists and strategists had tried everything, but nothing seemed to stop the Krill's advance. The Valorian Council met in their grand hall, their faces lined with worry. They knew they needed help, and they needed it fast. After much debate, they decided to send a desperate plea for help to the one being who might be able to save them. This being was not an alien, but a human, a legendary soldier known across the galaxy for his incredible skills and bravery. His name was Captain Jack Monroe. Captain Monroe was a hero in human history, but he had long retired from his life as a soldier. He lived alone in a remote corner of the galaxy, far from any intergalactic conflicts. Valoria's leaders knew that reaching him would be a challenge, but they had no other choice. The future of their world depended on it. In a small, quiet corner of the galaxy, Captain Monroe lived in a modest space station surrounded by silence. He spent his days in solitude, away from the chaos and battles of the galaxy. The soldier's past was filled with heroic deeds and countless battles, but he had chosen a life of peace. He had put away his weapons and was content with his quiet existence. One day, while Monroe was tinkering with an old piece of equipment, a strange signal interrupted his routine. It was a distress call from Valoria. The message was urgent and filled with desperation. The alien girl who sent the message was pleading for help, describing the dire situation on her planet and the destruction caused by the Krill. Captain Monroe listened to the message with growing concern. He remembered the tales of Valoria, a planet known for its beauty and advanced technology. It was hard to believe that such a place was now under threat. Monroe's mind raced as he thought about the Krill. He had heard of them before, known for their brutality and relentless attacks. The message ended with a heartfelt plea from the alien girl. She begged Monroe to come to Valoria and help them fight the Krill. Her voice was filled with hope and fear, and it struck a chord with Monroe. He had been living a peaceful life, but now he faced a decision that could change everything. At first, Monroe felt a wave of reluctance. He had left behind his past life for a reason. He was tired of fighting and wanted to stay away from conflicts. But as he pondered the message, he felt a sense of duty stirring within him. The Krill were a threat not just to Valoria, but to the entire galaxy. If he could help, maybe he could make a difference. Monroe knew that accepting the call would mean leaving his quiet life behind and stepping back into a world of danger and uncertainty. But he also knew that if he didn't act, countless lives could be lost, and the Krill would continue their rampage. With a deep breath, he made up his mind. He would go to Valoria and do whatever it took to help. As he prepared to leave, Monroe felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. The galaxy was waiting for him, and Valoria's last hope rested on his shoulders. He was about to embark on a journey that would test his skills and challenge his resolve. Little did he know, the adventure ahead would not only change the fate of Valoria, but also his own. Captain Jack Monroe stared out of the window of his small space station. The endless darkness of space was peaceful, but it also reminded him of the loneliness he had chosen. For years, he had lived in this quiet corner of the galaxy, far from the battles and chaos he used to face. But the distress signal from Valoria had changed everything. He replayed the message in his mind. The alien girl's voice was full of fear and hope. She spoke of her planet's destruction and begged for his help. Monroe knew that the Krill were a dangerous enemy, but he had left that life behind. He had seen enough conflict to last several lifetimes. As he walked around his station, Monroe thought about his past. He had once been a celebrated soldier, known for his bravery and skill. He had fought in many wars, but the cost had been high. Friends had been lost, and the weight of battle had taken its toll. After retiring, he had sworn never to pick up a weapon again. He had found solace in his quiet life, far from the troubles of the galaxy. But now, with the message from Valoria, Monroe felt a sense of responsibility that he couldn't ignore. He had spent years trying to forget the battles and wars, but the plea for help reminded him of his duty. He knew that if he refused, many innocent lives could be lost, and Valoria's beautiful world could be destroyed. Monroe sat down at his desk and stared at the old photograph of his squad. They had fought together, and their memories were bittersweet. They had been a family, and losing them had been one of the hardest things he had ever faced. He didn't want to go back to that life, but the soldier in him felt a pull. He picked up the communicator and sent a reply to Valoria's distress signal. "I have received your message. I need more information about the situation on your planet. I must understand the full extent of the danger before making a decision." Hours later, he received a detailed report. The alien girl, named Lyra, had sent additional information about the Krill invasion. The report described the Krill's strength, their advanced weapons, and their brutal tactics. It was worse than Monroe had imagined. The aliens were fighting a losing battle, and their hope was fading fast. Monroe read the report carefully. He was impressed by Lyra's courage and determination. She had been leading the resistance, trying to protect her people despite the overwhelming odds. Her bravery and leadership were evident, and it made Monroe question his own hesitation. He knew that going back to war would not be easy. He would have to face the Krill's terrifying technology and fight alongside aliens he had never met. But he also knew that he couldn't turn his back on a world in need. His own fears and doubts seemed small compared to the suffering of the Valorians. As he prepared for his journey, Monroe took one last look at his quiet space station. It had been his sanctuary, but now it was time to leave. He packed his gear, checked his ship, and set a course for Valoria. The decision was made, and there was no turning back. Monroe's ship cut through the darkness of space, heading toward the troubled planet. He felt a mix of emotions, nervousness, determination, and a hint of excitement. He was stepping back into a world he had left behind, but this time it was different. This time, he was not just fighting for himself, but for a planet that had called for his help. As he approached Valoria, he saw the signs of destruction from orbit. The once vibrant world was now scarred by the war. Monroe knew that the battle ahead would be fierce, but he was ready. He had made his decision, and now it was time to face the Krill and protect the alien world that had put its trust in him. Little did Monroe know, his arrival on Valoria would mark the beginning of a journey that would challenge his skills and change his life in ways he could never have imagined. Captain Jack Monroe landed his ship on the war-torn surface of Valoria. The sight that greeted him was a mix of destruction and determination. Alien cities were in ruins, and the once beautiful landscapes were scarred by battle. Monroe stepped out of his ship and was met by Lyra, the alien girl who had sent the distress signal. Her eyes, though tired, were filled with hope as she welcomed him. "Thank you for coming," Lyra said, her voice a mix of relief and urgency. "We need your help more than ever." Monroe nodded, taking in the sight of her makeshift camp. It was clear that she and her people had been fighting for a long time. "I'm here to help, but first, I need to understand what we're up against and how we can fight back." Lyra led him to a temporary command center where they reviewed the situation. She explained the Krill's tactics and their advanced weaponry. Monroe listened carefully, noting the weaknesses and strategies that might be useful. Despite his experience, the Krill's technology was new to him, and he needed to adapt. The first days were intense. Monroe began training Lyra and her team in human combat techniques. They practiced hand-to-hand combat, marksmanship, and survival skills. Lyra's people were quick learners, but they struggled with some of the more complex techniques. Monroe was patient, understanding that they had their own ways of fighting. Monroe's training sessions were demanding but also motivating. He pushed the aliens hard, but he also encouraged them, recognizing their courage and determination. Slowly but surely they improved. Lyra, in particular, stood out. She was a natural leader and a fast learner. Monroe saw in her the potential to turn the tide of the battle. As the training progressed, Monroe and Lyra began to bond. They spent long hours together, discussing strategies and sharing stories. Monroe learned about Lyra's life and her people's history. He was impressed by her bravery and the sacrifices she had made. Lyra, in turn, learned about Monroe's past as a soldier and the battles he had fought. Their conversations were often deep and personal. Monroe opened up about his decision to retire and the reasons behind it. He spoke of the pain he had experienced and the desire for peace. Lyra shared her hopes for her planet and the vision of a future where her people could live in harmony once more. One evening, as they sat by a makeshift campfire, Monroe saw a different side of Lyra. She was not just a leader, but also a young woman with dreams and fears. They talked about their dreams for the future, and Monroe felt a sense of connection he hadn't experienced in years. The bond between Monroe and Lyra grew stronger with each passing day. They became more than just allies. They became friends. Monroe found himself caring deeply about Lyra and her people. The purpose of his mission became more personal, and he felt a renewed sense of commitment. Training also brought out unexpected skills in Monroe. He discovered that his experience could be used in new ways. He adapted his tactics to fit the needs of the Valorians and came up with creative solutions to their problems. The aliens, in turn, showed him the value of their unique abilities and knowledge of their environment. As they continued their training, the team's morale improved. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting with hope and determination. Monroe's presence had made a difference, and Lyra's leadership had inspired them. When the time came for their first joint operation, Monroe and Lyra's team were ready. They had trained hard and built a strong bond. Monroe felt a mix of excitement and confidence as they prepared for the mission. The Krill were still a formidable enemy, but they now had a chance to turn the tide. As they set out, Monroe glanced at Lyra and saw the determination in her eyes. He knew that their journey together was just beginning, and he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The bond they had formed would be a crucial part of their success, and Monroe was more committed than ever to helping Valoria win its fight for survival. The day of the final battle arrived, and Valoria was a hive of activity. The sky was dark with smoke and debris from the ongoing conflict, and the ground was littered with remnants of past skirmishes. Captain Jack Monroe and Lyra's team had been preparing for this moment for weeks. Their training had sharpened their skills, and their determination was stronger than ever. Monroe stood at the command center, surrounded by maps and tactical plans. Lyra joined him, her face set with resolve. "This is it," she said, her voice steady. "We launch our final assault on the Krill today. We need to take out their command center to break their control over the troops." Monroe nodded. "We've trained for this. We know their weaknesses. Stick to the plan, and we'll make it through." The plan was risky, but had a chance of success. Monroe and Lyra's team would strike at the heart of the Krill's base, where their leadership was concentrated. If they could disable the command center, it would cause chaos among the enemy forces and give the Valorians a fighting chance. As they moved into position, Monroe and Lyra communicated via their comms. The tension was palpable, but they were focused and determined. The team approached the Krill's base under cover of darkness, using the terrain to their advantage. Monroe led the team, guiding them through the rocky landscape and past enemy patrols. The Krill's command center was heavily fortified, with armed guards and powerful energy shields protecting it. Monroe's team took out the guards silently, one by one. Lyra and her people were quick and precise, showing the skills they had learned from their training. Monroe was impressed by their efficiency and bravery. Reaching the command center's outer defenses, the team prepared for the final push. Monroe used explosives to breach the shield, creating a hole for them to enter. They rushed inside, where the Krill's leaders were gathered, unaware of the impending attack. The battle inside the command center was fierce. Monroe's team faced Krill soldiers equipped with advanced weapons and armor. The fight was intense, but the team's training and teamwork gave them an edge. Monroe and Lyra fought side by side, their movements synchronized and powerful. Monroe's experience and Lyra's courage combined to create a formidable force. As they fought their way through the command center, Monroe and Lyra reached the control room. The Krill leaders were in shock, realizing too late that their command center was under attack. Monroe planted a series of charges around the room, aiming to destroy the Krill's communication and control systems. With the charges set, Monroe and Lyra prepared to leave. The Krill leaders, now realizing their imminent defeat, scrambled to defend themselves. Monroe and Lyra fought their way out, making their escape just as the charges exploded. The blast was massive, shaking the entire command center and sending debris flying. Outside, the explosion caused chaos among the Krill forces. The disruption in their command structure led to confusion and disorganization. Valoria's forces seized the opportunity, launching a counterattack that pushed the Krill back. The tide of the battle was turning in their favor. Monroe and Lyra watched from a safe distance as the Krill forces retreated. The battle was won, but the cost had been high. Many of their allies had been lost, and the planet was still scarred from the conflict. But the victory was a crucial turning point. As the dust settled, Monroe and Lyra stood together surveying the aftermath. They had achieved what seemed impossible, turning the tide of the battle and giving Valoria a chance to rebuild. Monroe felt a deep sense of accomplishment and relief. The mission was complete, and he had played a key role in saving the alien world. Lyra turned to Monroe, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We couldn't have done this without you," she said. "You've given us hope and a chance for a future." Monroe smiled, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. He had come to care deeply for Lyra and her people. Their fight was over for now, but the journey had changed him. He had faced his fears and found a new purpose in the process. As the sun rose over the battered landscape of Valoria, Monroe and Lyra knew that the battle was only the beginning. The road to recovery would be long, but they were ready to face it together. The war was over, but Valoria was far from healed. The once beautiful planet was now a landscape of scars and ruins. Captain Jack Monroe and Lyra stood at the edge of the city, watching as the first rays of the sun illuminated the destruction left by the conflict. The battle had been won, but the real work was just beginning. In the days following the victory, Monroe and Lyra worked tirelessly to help Valoria rebuild. The Krill's defeat had given the Valorians a chance to reclaim their world, but there was much to do. The command center's destruction had crippled the Krill's ability to coordinate, but they had left behind damage that needed immediate attention. Lyra led the efforts to organize relief and reconstruction. She was everywhere at once, coordinating teams, distributing supplies, and comforting those who had lost loved ones. Her leadership and strength inspired everyone around her. Monroe admired her dedication and worked alongside her, using his skills to assist in whatever way he could. One day, as they worked together, Monroe and Lyra took a moment to rest. They sat on the edge of a makeshift camp, watching as the people of Valoria began the long process of rebuilding. The sense of hope was palpable, and Monroe felt a deep satisfaction knowing he had played a part in this new beginning. "Thank you, Monroe," Lyra said, her voice filled with warmth. "We couldn't have done this without you. Your help made all the difference." Monroe smiled, feeling a mix of pride and humility. "I'm glad I could help. Your people are incredibly strong. It's been an honor to fight alongside them." As they spoke, Monroe reflected on his own journey. He had come to Valoria to fight, but he had found something more, a purpose and a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. The battle had changed him, and the connection he had formed with Lyra and her people had given him a new perspective on life. With the immediate danger gone, Monroe began to consider his future. He knew he couldn't stay on Valoria forever, but he wanted to leave something behind that would help ensure the planet's long-term recovery. He proposed the idea of establishing a training program to help Valoria's defenders stay prepared for any future threats. The program would teach them advanced combat techniques and strategies, ensuring they were ready to protect their world. Lyra supported the idea wholeheartedly. She understood the importance of being prepared and agreed to help implement the program. Together, they began training Valoria's new generation of defenders, combining Monroe's military expertise with the Valorians' knowledge of their own world. As the weeks turned into months, Valoria began to recover. The once ruined cities were slowly being rebuilt, and the people began to heal from their wounds. Monroe and Lyra's training program proved to be a success, creating a strong and skilled defense force that would help keep Valoria safe. Monroe knew that his time on Valoria was coming to an end. He had helped turn the tide of the battle and contributed to the planet's recovery. As he prepared to leave, he felt a deep sense of accomplishment and gratitude. Before departing, Monroe and Lyra shared one final moment together. They stood in the middle of a newly rebuilt park, surrounded by the vibrant colors of Valoria's flora. The park was a symbol of hope and renewal, a testament to the resilience of the planet and its people. "Goodbye, Lyra," Monroe said, his voice filled with emotion. "I'll never forget what we've accomplished here. You and your people have shown incredible strength and hope." Lyra smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "Thank you, Monroe. You've given us a chance for a better future. We will always be grateful for your help." With a final handshake and a heartfelt farewell, Monroe boarded his ship and took off from Valoria. As he left the planet behind, he looked back at the world he had come to care for so deeply. The future was uncertain, but Valoria was on the path to recovery, and Monroe felt a sense of peace knowing he had played a part in its survival. As he traveled through the stars, Monroe reflected on his journey. He had come to Valoria as a soldier and left as a friend. The experiences and connections he had made would stay with him forever, shaping his future and reminding him of the power of courage, hope, and friendship.